It's a really rainy day, but like they say, never let the rain stop the carnival. So we're not going to let the rain stop our gardening today. One of the greatest things that has come out of COVID is that many farmers, gardeners have been born, not only in the United States and Europe, but right here in the Caribbean, and in particular, right here in these beautiful British Virgin Islands where I live. So I really started gardening back in 2013, about 7 years ago, and it was more of a hobby and trying to see if I could turn my brown fingers green. And it wasn't until I started thinking about reopening Lady Sarah's and wanting to make it more of a farm-to-table restaurant that I really started to pursue gardening seriously. However, I got into Lady Sarah's and immediately, well, almost immediately realized that I could not do all of the farming required by myself to supply a restaurant. So I soon turned to other local farmers. And in particular, we wanted to work with organic farmers, people who were not using so many chemicals. If you hear any noise in the background, we are just below a busy street, so do pardon us. So I started looking at the gardening side a lot more seriously in 2017, 2018. Then after COVID struck earlier this year, I thought I should expand my garden because, of course, like everybody else, I also was thinking about food security. So I turned my front yard into a garden. And I think it was about actually in late August that I showed you what I had done with my front yard, how I had converted it into a garden by lasagna layering with cardboard and then topsoil and compost and other garden soil. And that is what I'm going to show you today, what we have growing on in this new garden. You'll be amazed to see what we have growing on only 6 weeks later. So in this new garden, I have created about 20 growing beds. And the first, well, actually, this is the second bed because the first one, the crops I planted there, because of all of the rain, those have failed. And quite frankly, in this area where we live over at Windy Hill, we do have issues growing the vining plants like the cucumbers and the zucchini and pumpkins. It just always tends to be a bit too wet. And in this bed, we have a lot of volunteer plants that have come from our compost. So we've done in-ground composting. And these are some of the seeds. So we have spring onions, we have tomatoes, and these are all volunteer. And I've just let them go more as a nursery bed, and I can always move them. Like this is really a lot of passion fruit because we do use only fresh fruit in our restaurant to make our drinks. And so all the seeds got thrown into the compost, and there are quite a lot of passion fruit seeds there. Sorry, seedlings. We have our sunflowers. These are early sunflowers. Hopefully the sun comes back. One of the other things we want to talk about in this new garden is what we've learned is that at this time of the year, the sun goes south. So we don't get as much sun at this time of the year. So you'll see that we're doing more slightly shade tolerant plants. But the sunflowers are in a place where we get most of the sun during this time of the year as well. These beds are sweet potato, and again, they're all volunteer. They came up on their own, again from the compost, and we've just decided to let them stay to see if we get anything from them. In this bed, we have green beans. We've grown a lot of green beans in our other garden, which we'll show you in another program. But they're starting to flower, as you can see. In the past, we've been very fortunate to get a lot of green beans, and we're hoping that this little bed would also give us a lot of beans. Over here, for the first time, I'm trying like the broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, which I've never grown before. But because this is a cooler area and they can take a little bit of shade, we've decided to give it a try. And one of the other things we've done is we've interplanted it with some of the same green beans because they're great growing partners. And the thyme is a pest repellent for cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower. And then we also have a pot of mint, which is also a pest repellent for these plants. So this bed, we're trying our hands at broccoli, and this bed, we're trying our hands at cauliflower. I'm not so sure how they're going to turn out because some of them are not doing very well. Maybe too much shade, too much water. We'll figure it out as we go along. In this bed, we have what are really our sun-loving plants. Black-eyed peas, which we've grown a lot of earlier in the year. Experimenting with them here, we didn't know if they would do very well, again because of the lack of sun, but as you can see they are growing well and they're already blossoming. We're going to have to vine this in another direction. They're not all doing as well, but the ones that are getting all that they need are doing fairly well. So we've interplanted in here some radishes, but again it's been raining excessively. So they're not doing that well. So what we're trying to do is in this garden is to use various gardening concepts, square foot gardening, the lasagna layering like I spoke about earlier, and also interplanting where we're planting crops together crops that would grow well together. So here we have carrots and radishes, which we'll be thinning out in another few days. Again, we're just hoping that the rain doesn't continue too much so that they would become nice and healthy. And this is I guess for now, one of the 2 sunniest spots in the garden. So our sunflowers are beginning to blossom, and we should have sunflowers in a couple of weeks. Very proud that we're still getting sunflowers at this time of year. We have peppers here, and interplanted with the peppers are parsley and some carrots at the end of the bed. So this is where we have our cabbage bed. And last week, I think I interplanted, I seeded some beets. So we're going to see how well they do with the excess rain. This bed is an example of the partnership that we're doing with some of the other farms on the island. We bought these seedlings from the farm up at Great Mountain. These are wildfire lettuce, which we put in, and they are really developing quite nicely. Plant-wise, that's where we got those from. And these 2 beds are all beets. We think they're coming along nicely. They were recently planted, and you can see that they're coming in very well. That bed over there is an example of the nuisances that we have in our garden. Wild chickens, you know, everybody in the BVI is familiar with the wild chickens. They come from everywhere when you least expect. And so this being an example of the in-bed composting. So what we did was, after putting down the cardboard and a layer of topsoil, we put in a layer of compost material, and on top of that we put in our garden soil. So we've been successful with most of our beds. This bed was not planted. What you see growing in there is really from the compost. So what we do is just leave it to rest for a while until most of the heat goes away from the bed, and then we would just plant directly into it. And all the plant gets all the nutrients that they need. However, the chickens do a great job of helping the compost to break down faster, but you really don't want them in your garden digging up the stuff you've planted. Fortunately, we hadn't planted anything in this bed yet. Okay, so this is really an extension of the new garden. It hasn't yet been formalized, but we've planted some watermelons here. You can see the bags there to help to suppress the weeds until the plants become fully established. And hopefully we'll get some watermelons. I think I've planted maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10. So hopefully we get a good crop of watermelons. Let's see what happens. And one of the other things that we've recently done, I think you may have noticed that we don't have a water system in our plants in our garden yet. That's because we've been very slowly started putting in the water before we started the garden, just because of the importance of water to any garden. I don't recommend that you start a garden if you don't know where your water source is, because water is extremely important. Plants are vegetables are mostly water, and you want to make sure that you have a great source of water before you start your garden. And that's what we've done up there. And guess what? Right now we don't need it. It's great. I mean, the rain is falling. Yes, it's a bit too much water in the garden for some of the plants, but it's also filling up our water tanks so that when it does get dry, we have a great supply of water. And then we are gonna hopefully get this completed at some point soon. So this will be our storage area, our mini greenhouse, start our seedlings and so forth. It's small, but it's gonna work out just great. I'm focusing now on doing more fruit trees in this area, and I'll do more vegetables in the upper garden. So where I'm standing right now is below what I call the star fruit tree that keeps on giving and giving and giving. So right now it's loaded with fruit again. I've cut this tree down. I chopped it down in the early days because I didn't want it to grow here. So that's why we chose to plant them in this area. Some of them are doing exceptionally well. We know they don't like wet feet, too much water. And this is clay soil. Before I started vegetable gardening, as I said, I was very much into ornamental gardening. I'm not doing so much of that anymore, but I did plant quite a bit of ginger lilies.